Lesson 30. The Nine Consciousnesses in Buddhism. The teaching of the Nine Consciousnesses is of crucial importance, in that it reveals to us our true identity and how life is perpetuated in the cycle of birth and rebirth, samsara. The Nine Consciousnesses are different levels of consciousness which function perpetually together in our life. The Sanskrit term Vajnayana, which designates consciousness, internalizes a set of activities such as sensation, cognition, discernment. The pedagogical concern requires to study separately, the sixth first, then the seventh, eighth and finally the ninth. The first six consciousnesses. The first five consciousnesses are the usual senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. The sixth consciousness is a function that integrates and deconstructs the different sensory ears to form an overall image or thought identifying what our five senses communicate to us. Our daily life is fundamentally based on the six functions of life. The seventh consciousness. The seventh consciousness is located below the first six levels of consciousness mentioned above. While the first six consciousnesses are turned towards the phenomenal world, the seventh consciousness is oriented towards our inner life. This explains why it is not dependent on sensory information. The seventh consciousness is the foundation of our personal sense of identity. The seventh consciousness is at the origin of attachment to a self that is proper and distinct from others. The same is true for the faculty of discernment, that is, of distinguishing the true from the false. The eighth consciousness. Localization and meaning. The eighth consciousness, called consciousness ilaya, in Sanskrit or collective insouciance, and located below the seventh consciousness, deeper than the other seven, that the energy of karma that resides, the energy of our karma. Its characteristics, its structure, a consciousness that abides to the contrary of the first seven which disappeared when death occurs. The eighth consciousness remains through samsara. The alaya consciousness remains life stream, sometimes in the active phase of life, sometimes in the latent activities of other consciousness. The interaction between the seventh and eighth level of consciousness. Buddhism teaches us that the seventh level of consciousness involves illusions that are peculiar and deeply related to the nature of self. These illusions arise from the relationship between the seventh and eighth levels of consciousness and are distinguished almost exclusively by the egocentrism. Buddhism teaches us that the seventh consciousness arises from the eighth. This perception arises from the eighth being seen as static, unique and isolated, while, in reality, the eighth consciousness is a state of constant flux. At this level, our lives are independent, influencing each other, therefore the perception of a static and isolated ego from the seventh consciousness is ultimately wrong. The seventh consciousness is also the geometrical locus of fear and death. Because not being able to perceive the true nature of the light is, as perpetual flow of view energy, one imagines that as soon as death occurs, the eighth consciousness will be extinguished, for a death takes root in the deep layers of the subconscious. Buddhism teaches us that the illusion that the eighth consciousness is the true self is fundamental ignorance, because as it implies the negation of the principle of interdependence of beings. This feeling of self, separated and isolated from others and at the origin of many evils, discrimination, destruction of all around one, unbridled instinct of ownership. The eighth consciousness, the karma reservoir. Buddhism teaches us that our influential thoughts, words, acts necessarily leave alone in the deep layers of the eighth consciousness. This is karma, so this level of consciousness is called the karmic reservoir. Place where seeds or latest energy is liberated to be positive or negative. The eighth consciousness receives seeds of all kinds and forms. It is said to be neutral. When a certain of conditions are met, positive latent laws are likely to manifest in the form of positive effects in a person's life and in the form of positive psychological impulses such as confidence, non-evidence, self-control, compassion and wisdom. Contrary to the latent, negative causes are likely to manifest themselves through many forms of delusion and destructive behavior and cause our own sufferings and thus sufferings of the others. The eighth consciousness, the receptacle of a torrent of karma energy in constant circulation. Karmic energy in the eighth consciousness is constantly flowing through, transforming our lives and experiences. This karmic flow continues to receive eternally our actions, thoughts, words. One of the major characteristics of this flow is that it preserves the identity of each and every one in the successive cycles of life and death. We can see it, The eighth consciousness is unstable and fluid. An immutable or inevitable destiny it is by developing positive karma, and one can leave this eighth consciousness this and also to reach the level of the ninth consciousness or Amala consciousness. The ninth consciousness, Amala consciousness, in Sanskrit the ninth consciousness can be considered as the life of the cosmos itself. Amala consciousness is a fundamentally pure consciousness. It does not contain any karmic impurities. It represented the true eternal self. One of the major strengths of Orthodox Buddhism lies in its desire to directly awaken the energy of this consciousness, the enlightened nature of the Buddha, and consequently to purify the others, more superficial consciousnesses. Buddhist practice aims to bring out this ninth consciousness. Once sprung up, Amala consciousness is likely to transform the stable negative karma elements of the eighth consciousness, in that transcending the perception of the individual, by merging with the latent energy of his family, his environment but also with that of animals and plants. A positive transformation of this karmic energy boosts changes in the lives of others. Once the consciousness is transformed, a unique wisdom occurs, the Buddha's wisdom with which the Buddhas are endowed. This wisdom allows its recipient to be in communion with the universe,